As you know, our society is in a process of transformation. It does appear that some parts of our society, some industries, may be transforming much more slowly than others. The CEO of the Estate Agency Affairs Board, Momodupi Mohlala, says that her industry is transforming too slowly. Simply doesn't have enough black people in the industry compared to the number of white people that it has. She's with me now. Momodupi, good afternoon to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming in person during this era on a Sunday afternoon.
Yes. Good afternoon, Stephen, and good afternoon to the viewers at home.
The figures that you quote, you call them established agents, and there's obviously a hierarchy. You would start as an intern, become an agent, become an established agent. You use that phrase. But nearly 7,000 white estate agents and only 999 black.
Correct.
That means only 12% of estate agents in this category are black.
Yes, no, that's true. The figures are very dire because if you look at the picture holistically, we actually have 41,000 registered estate agents to show that this is a sector that is viable and vibrant. But of that 41,000 estate agents, only 20,800 are your full status and principals, meaning those that can get economic value. The remaining are interns. But of that 20,800, only 999 are principals, and only 1,445 are full status agents, which would mean that the only black people in the industry who can run their businesses are just over 900. And that is very worrying for us because the remaining 17,000 odd are white established estate agents. And we feel that there needs to be some change in relation to the representation of black people, especially because 90% of the population is black and the consumers of the product are black. So clearly there's something that is not quite right in relation to this particular equation.
I was going to ask you about the consumers slightly later, but I do just want to get to this now. I mean, I don't know if you maybe have figures of percentage of home buyers or house buyers by race. I mean, and I don't know if it is relevant or not, but it probably is relevant. But from what you're saying, the majority of people buying homes isn't white anymore.
No, it's not. Actually, I believe that the statistics that we've been seeing lately, you find that the people who are actually the biggest consumers of housing products are actually black women in their 20s and their 30s. So clearly, you see that the investment in the market, especially the residential market, is being driven by black people, especially black women. So that then needs to translate into empowerment of estate agents, of black estate agents, but that is not happening. And we've picked up that there are three critical factors that are influencing the failure of growth of black estate agents in the market, even though the buyers are black. We found that there's a problem of access to markets. Now, you find that a lot of black estate agents don't get listings in the lucrative established markets. It's still your conservative white estate agents that get access to those markets. And those are the markets that generate a lot of commission for estate agents and sustainability. But we've also seen that there's also a lack of access to bonds, meaning that, unfortunately, because of the history of this country, you find that bond brokers or bond originators are people who actually have connections in the bank. So if you've never been to school with a particular person or you are not socialized in the same way, you find it very difficult to access those particular individuals. But those individuals are very critical because if you do not have access to bonds, then how are you going to sell properties? So that's the third critical factor. But the third and most important critical factor is the fact that we have picked up that there's no access to funding. And for any business to sustain itself, you need access to funding. And because our industry is very commission-based, you find that people have to wait for long periods of time before they get access to their commission. And because of our history and the fact that most Africans do not come, or black people do not come from a very strong financial base, they find it very difficult to wait for 6 to 12 months before they can have access to commission. So those are the areas where we think we need to actually tap in and deal with these issues.
So I mean, what would normally happen? I mean, I'm not an expert in your industry, you are, but what would probably happen is that someone would become an intern agent first, then they would slowly start to earn money so that the commission would come in. Once you get to a particular point where you've made enough of the commission, and you see this all the time, you know, some of the estate agencies are huge, they're generational, they've been going on for a long time. Some of them are one-person bands, often one-man bands, and often one-woman bands. But to do that, you would need to have a name in the industry first, and usually this would be in a certain area. Let's pick an example. Let's pick Hyde Park, right? You would get to be a name in that area and people would know you. You would have a list of people because you would have had a show day. You would probably, despite what your boss says, have taken a picture of every time someone comes in to buy a house and you've taken their name and number. You have an SMS list that you can sell to, all of these things. So that mechanism isn't working in terms of generating situations in which black people can become established agents. Is that the mechanism that's broken?
That's correct. But over and above that, even in ordinary marketing, when you're a new entrant, let's say whether you're black or you're white in the industry, you need to have a place where you can market your property. And you find platforms like your Property 24, those are not accessible to black estate agents. There are very few who have access to it because you obviously have to belong to certain estate agencies that are listed with Property 24 and have such relationships with Property 24. So we are saying, give estate agents access to some of those platforms. But there's also an issue of financial, because, I mean, those services do not come for free. You need to pay for that. And now, if you're even struggling to get access to listings, how much more getting access to those marketing platforms? Because I'm sure you know we all live in an age of technology and people want to have access to properties a click away. But now there is that challenge in relation to that. But even in your print media, you will notice that the agencies that tend to advertise, for instance, in your property section of Sunday Times or on the Saturday Star, most of them are not your black estate agents, or even if they're black estate agents, it's those that work for established agencies. So if you want to set up your own business as a black estate agent and enter the market, there are lots of barriers to entry from a financial point of view. But also, just to go back to your example, Stephen, there's also another aspect, because when persons go through the different levels, for instance, if you're an intern, you need to write an exam to become a full status, and then from being a full status to a principal, you need to write an exam. We also noted that as the Estate Agency Affairs Board, there were certain aspects where we were also creating barriers to entry, because we expect you to pay fees to us, which is a membership fee every year. But even when you write exams, you have to buy the study material, you need to pay for the exams. So we have then put in an amnesty program in place to say that if you cannot afford as a black estate agent, you apply to us, we make an assessment of your application, and then we exempt you from paying any of the regulatory fees. So we're not just saying industry must come to the table, but even as the regulator, we're trying to remove any impediments towards black estate agents.
We're speaking to Momodupi Mohlala. She is the CEO of the Estate Agency Affairs Board. More to come on this conversation, important conversation, in just a moment. Sunday afternoon, are you going to go house shopping later? Are you going to make a note of the identity of the estate agent? That's the conversation we'll continue with in a moment. Continuing your conversation here on Newsfeed this afternoon with the CEO of the Estate Agency Affairs Board, Momodupi Mohlala. Momodupi, thanks for staying with us, by the way. There's some things, so sometimes when you see a slow pace of transformation, sometimes it is because of the structure of an industry or profession. So, for example, to be an advocate can take a very long time, and you have to go through pupillage, and you have to do that unpaid for a year, which becomes a sort of structural barrier. Sometimes there are perhaps one or two cases where sort of vested interests have deliberately sabotaged the process. They're not going to let anything change, they control it.
Correct.
Which is it here?
Look, I think it's a little of both. I think the people who are obviously resisting change within the industry, because, I mean, it's clear, people can pay lip service all they like, but when you look at the figures, it becomes crystal clear that there are certain structural build-ins that prevent black people from actually growing within the industry. And we have said we need to sit down with these people and agree on a way forward. But if, irrespective of that, we are finding that it's very difficult. In fact, they will pay lip service, but they actually don't do anything in relation to that. That is why we've then said, as the EAB, we need to put programs in place, and people need to participate in those programs. For instance, we've said that there needs to be the internship program. The internship program, yes, unfortunately, obviously, there have been teething problems as we've gone along, but we believe that it will be a meaningful way to bring people in. But it's not enough to just make people interns. They need to be given full status. They also need to become principals. And we are saying, team up with us to make sure that these people come into the industry and they grow in the industry. But the argument we've repeatedly received is, how do you expect us to train our own competition? How do you expect us to train people who will take over from us tomorrow? But unfortunately, fortunately, transformation is a legal imperative, and we cannot compromise on that. That's why we then said, as the regulator, we have a legislative imperative, we will take a lead on it. We've worked on the internship program. Even though we had COVID, we were at least able to bring in about 1,400 interns, which is new blood into the industry. But even the exemption program that I'm talking about, it has the effect of bringing people who may be operating illegally into the mainstream. And it is saying, you will be given an exemption for 5 years from paying any regulatory costs. But it mustn't be misunderstood that we are saying people won't write the exams. They write the exams, but they will not be expected to pay. But most importantly, we're also saying we want to bring in an SMME program, which we're working on now, to make sure that we build black estate agents that are black owned and have and black run businesses. And we will obviously make sure that the issue of technology, which I was talking about, which seems to be a big barrier, is at the heart of it. But there's also been this criticism in the industry that the EAB talks about transformation, but then we don't issue fidelity fund certificates timelessly. I'm sure you'd have seen there was a litigation that was undertaken recently. And we are saying the problem with the issuance of FFCs has been a historical problem, and we are trying to work on that problem. But it cannot be seen as now a reason for us to divert from the main agenda of transformation. Because one thing that is not said, yes, we accept that any delayed FFC is obviously affecting a person's business. But we had issued over 43,000 FFCs in that financial year, and then we were taken to court for just over 200 FFCs. But I can safely say now that we've issued all those FSCs, and I believe that the black players in the industry have not suffered any prejudice. In fact, they're continuing to grow. And the delay was only an issue of a month. But we are working on it. We're making sure it happens. So we don't want the whole debate on transformation to now be derailed and we look at a narrow issue of fidelity fund certificates, whereas they're not taking into account that we had issued over 43,000.
Okay, you're talking about the real estate business owners of South Africa. They're the people who went to court.
Correct.
Do you believe they were doing this to sabotage transformation? Be quite a big claim if you say yes.
Well, I'll answer that question as follows. For me, the timing seems very interesting. This problem of FFCs has been there for the past 7 years. They've never gone to court. So why would you go to court now? And the other issue that is quite critical, and I think the public needs to know, we're at the cusp of having a new piece of legislation coming into the industry governance. Our mandate is being extended from just governing estate agents to property practitioners, which means the Estate Agency Affairs Board will now be presiding over a 7 trillion rand industry. So as an industry, as a body with an interest in an industry, obviously they would want to get membership. So, you know, there are many theories around why this litigation at this point in time. But I just want to also indicate that the judge had given an order that we submit proper statistics, and she had given us a month. And late last week, we actually did give the report to the judge that showed that we have done what is required of us.
So there are a couple of things. I mean, you spoke about the sort of structural change you're trying to make with the fees. There's obviously a process of internships and all the rest that can be done. Is there anything else structural that could be changed? You spoke about access to finance and bonds, right? And I mean, some people might say, well, the bond allocation process, in other words, who gets a bond or not, is up to the banks. We know it's really 4, depending on how rich you are, maybe 5 or 6 banks that are involved in this. Does that bond process, the bond initiation process, there are websites that do it, is it as neutral as it should be? Because if it's neutral, then the identity of the state agent wouldn't really matter.
No, it is not. And we found that it's a big, big problem, because in our processes of trying to obviously introduce the Property Practitioners Act, which will include regulating bond originators, we have actually found that even that industry is not transformed. In fact, you'd be very hard-pressed to even find one black bond originator. So now, black estate agents are then held, well, I don't want to use the word ransom, that's too intense, but they actually have to go through bond originators who may not have the same social or transformation agenda that they have. So that's another bottleneck in the value chain.
It's also, I mean, I don't know how I'm going to put this without someone attacking me of something, but so selling a house is often about relationships. And those relationships are often, is almost human nature. That doesn't mean that it's not problematic. Are often about whether you trust the person, about whether you sometimes speak like they do, whether you are interested in sending your children to the same school, those kinds of things.
Correct.
I mean, is that a part of this? Because from what you said earlier, the customers are not white, or not majority white. So there's a very strange sort of thing to all of this, because there's a sort of value chain, right? And at the same time, if the majority of the customers are not white, you would think that the process of transformation would be maybe slow, but almost automatic.
Okay, but let's then contextualize the society we live in.
Sure.
The upper echelons of the economic strata are obviously not black.
Yeah.
From our historical past, the lucrative markets, the areas where one can make a lot of commission, are still predominantly white. So that would mean a person has to have that kinship towards the person they asked to listen.
It's all about who went to school with who.
Exactly. And we speak the same language, and we are socialized the same. So, you know, I would list with you in that particular context. So even if the market is showing that a lot of black women are now leading in the investment, you should look at the level at which they are more your middle income as opposed to your upper income. So that still affects the whether or not you know the value that a black estate agent would get from it. But the critical issue is, yes, the black estate agents may get a listing, but if they cannot get into through the bond process, then a consumer will then go to the person who will be able to get it through the bond process, which then double prejudices a black estate agent.
Is there another thing? So, I mean, to use an easier example, just in terms of timing, I remember once in a debate around why some middle class, we still call them former Model C schools because no one knows what else to call them, but we still call them that, right?
Yes.
I asked someone once in a conversation, a public conversation, why are there still so many white teachers? And one of the arguments they made is they said that a lot of people will be a teacher at a school for 30 years, which means that the pace of transformation, you can't push them out because of their race. I think that would take you to court in a second. But it means that transforming the teacher body of that school is a much slower process than the learners, because the learners are only there for 5 years. And I was very struck by that argument. It's a very interesting argument. Is that happening in estate agents? Because someone can, by the time they're sort of 40, be well known, often it's a she, I don't know why that is, but be well known in an area, and they will, I mean, it's not a job they're going to retire from. They'll wait until they're 75 before they go. I would.
No, that's very true, because, I mean, I always say that the estate agency business is very similar to the legal profession. It's one of those professions whereby you get better with age, and the more you've been in the system, the more established and
like
the more
TV
money.
presenting.
Exactly. The more money you're going to make. So, in effect, you are very right, because obviously the older you get, you still can't sell a property. And I mean, there's no retirement age within the estate agency profession. So you find that it does obviously block new entrants from coming in. And that's why you find that we have a huge number of interns, but somehow they disappear. They disappear along the way. That is why we've now said our internship program, the government policy speaks to a cutoff of 35, anyone between the ages of 18 and 35. But we are now saying in our internship program, we actually need to look at retirees, because we can get people from the echelons of retired teachers, retired nurses, retired social workers. And those are people who are established in the community. And they would obviously be able to make breakthroughs much faster. And even their economy, I mean, their purse is a much stronger purse than a young person, because they are now established. So we are saying, from a transformation point of view, we need to look at young people, but we also need to look at the retirees as well, or even people who are middle-aged who have money to invest. Because at the end of the day, what we want to do is make sure that we increase the numbers, but we meaningfully increase the numbers. And we believe that category would obviously bring real value to the industry.
Now, I suppose they would also be more inclined to take young black people as interns, and there'll be a sort of two-step process.
Correct.
Or dual speed or whatever it is. We're moving into, everyone calls it the gig economy, I hate that phrase, but we're moving into sort of where everyone has more than one job. You have 2 or 3 or 4 jobs. An estate agent, being an estate agent, I would think for a lot of people is one of those jobs.
Correct.
In a strange way, being an estate agent, even though it's quite physical, very few people buy without actually walking through the house.
True.
You know, I don't think the idea of a show day will ever go away. But I was just intrigued by whether or not the nature of being an estate agent is changing as part of this gig economy.
Okay. Yes, I think it is. And I actually think black estate agents can take full advantage of it. Because historically, agents have always bent on show days and walking a person through and listings in a newspaper. But we are saying, with technology, and one of the byproducts of the COVID epidemic is that we've now learned to work virtually. So why can't we use what is already being done overseas? We can have virtual tours, because literally you can go onto a website and almost physically feel like you're touching the walls in that particular property. So we're saying that those are the competitive elements that black estate agents can use in order to get into the sector. But over and above that, transacting can also be done virtually. But what we are saying is we need to just put a slight spin to it. we need to start infusing South African indigenous languages. Because a lot of transacting is only done in English. But when you think about it, when you buy a house and you interact with an estate agent who is African, you hardly ever use English. It's only at the time when you get to sign the document. So we're saying if we start infusing that, that will obviously start giving black estate agents a further competitive edge.
Momodupi Mohlala, thanks very much indeed. If you're going to be spending your Sunday afternoon buying a house, well, you can do it and watch us all at the same time. Just, go online. Momodupi Mohlala, of course, is the CEO of the Estate Agency Affairs Board.